Supercharge your NetZero Goals with MuleSoft. I know this sounds interesting, but a bit abstract. So please stick with us because we will clarify everything. And if we don't, do not hesitate to ask anything over our chat or even reach us out directly. The contact details will be shared on the last slide. My name is Aleksandra Bratic, and I will be facilitating this event and monitoring the chat channel. In case of any questions you raise, I will make sure our speakers give you the answers. So I am delighted to present you Devoteam, a company that promotes technologies that have a positive impact on people and the world around us. Devoteam is a leading consulting firm based across Europe and Middle East, with over 10,000 of developers across 18 countries. Our focus is on digital strategy, tech platforms, cybersecurity, business transformations. Our tech partners are well-known companies such as Salesforce, Google, AWS, ServiceNow, and many more. Today, on today's webinar, we are focusing on how to supercharge your NetZero Goals with MuleSoft. MuleSoft is part of the Salesforce product table. It is a middleware that provides an API-led system integrational approach. We are delivering integrational projects using MuleSoft products in business verticals such as CPG, retail industry, in multiple countries of operations. So now let's meet our speakers. Our first presenter will be Richard Cooper, who is S Platform Head of Delivery. With his extensive background in business technology, he's leading our sustainability offering and works directly with clients, helping them achieve their visions and tech delivery. Next, we have Dr. Bobby James, well-qualified solution architect and software engineer with over 25 years of rich experience. Tom Saxby, resource management analyst that brings a fresh perspective to our sustainability equation. Lastly, myself, Aleksandra Bratic, an experienced integrational consultant and project manager responsible for leading projects to sustainable transformations. We all understand the importance and complexity of the balance between technology and business, and we are always open for collaborations that drive the positive change. So before we get into the details, it's important to highlight that these slides and presentation should not be copied or shared with anybody without the appropriate approval. Now, I will give my word to Richard, who will open this webinar. So please enjoy.
Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction, Alex. So thanks for setting the scene and welcome everybody. It's great to have you on the call and see so many of you. Today, we are taking a broad brush view on how companies can approach the net zero challenge. So we're reviewing some of the issues and some of the topics, and we've got the agenda up on the screen here for you. We'll be setting the scene, looking at the approach and solution and options on how you can then take action. But first of all, let's assume that there's a unanimous consensus among all of you on the webinar that you're listening, that you agree that the current levels of CO2 emissions that humans are putting into the atmosphere is unsustainable. Okay, so it's important to agree on that, because if you want to have a debate on that separately, please have that outside the call. But the focus on our webinar today is about how you can use the tech-first approach to achieve that net zero desire for your business. Okay, it's an aspiration aimed at nullifying your CO2 emissions through concerted efforts. All right. So let's just put a bit of background to what we're talking about. I'm sure most of you are already aware. So next slide, please. So the climate imperative I'm sure you're all aware of what's going on at the moment. So the fact is that we're putting more CO2 emissions into the atmosphere than ever before. We've got an alarming prospect of the global temperatures surging above that 1.5 Celsius threshold. That's going to have significant impact for us all. So we're already seeing each year now the fires and the heat waves that are appearing every summer. So these things that are now happening are a direct consequence. So what we're trying to say is that there is a crisis going on, and we need to look and address that, and we can do that through taking a tech first approach. So innovation can present the opportunities for the companies that take it head on, the challenge, because the consumer out there is looking for products and businesses that are now dealing with this. So the strategies that companies can have to become net zero can be a winning strategy and a winning approach. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on, but we're going to talk about personas. So the next slide, please. So throughout this presentation, we're talking, we're putting it in context for Jackie Buckley, who's a product buyer. Okay, she has some pain points. She's working within various industries, but she's got some pain points. She's got some user needs, and she's got some goals. Right. So the pain points around the instability of the pricing or the raw materials that she's purchasing, the needs around buying products to fulfill a consumer demand, and then the goals, giving that visibility into that supply chain, but also with an edge of where are my emissions coming from and how can I understand that. So we'll be putting this into context as we talk through each of the slides. Next slide, please. So to give an example, working in the supply chain management field, and if we're starting where there's a need for purchasing of raw materials to produce a product, in this case, it's apples to produce apple juice. There are potentially many different price fluctuations, the economic pricing and fluctuations in market and demand, and that has also been compounded by the sustainability challenges that we face. So very much how does Jackie understand all this data, and where does she get all this information from in an easy understandable way, right? So especially with things that are grown are raw materials, it's very difficult to understand the fluctuations and the impact of significant events that are happening out there. So she'll make those decisions based on that information that she has access to now, and she'll then go for that best price. So its price is significant, but also its quality. And also another challenge is also bringing in that, well, what are the emissions from this purchase, from the raw materials that are being produced? How are they getting that information? So that's a challenge for her, but she's doing, at the moment, they're doing the best they can through that purchasing process, but there's a significant challenge around the emissions. You have to have good relationships with your suppliers and also the brands that you work with. And I know that can be challenging. Next slide, please. So the other example is working in the consumer package goods market and also retail. So this is more about when there's more of a finished product, same sort of challenges, right? You've got that package product and you're purchasing. So you may have some sustainability information there, but again, they're trying to understand what are the sustainable credentials of that product, but also what are the CO2 emissions associated with that product, and how do we then present that to the end consumer, and indeed do we present that to the end consumer? Is that something that the consumers are going to make a purchasing decision on? And it definitely is. There is market research out there to suggest that consumers are now wanting to buy products that are showing the impact on the environment. Okay, and what that is. So Jackie, product buyer, working in the retail CPG space. So we'll be referencing that through the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. So if we think about the corporate sustainability challenges in kind of summary, it breaks down into three main areas: the pollution prevention, the resource conservation, and the waste minimization, and also recycling. So the recycling is really significant because a lot of the recycling at the moment, across different countries will get moved around, and you don't necessarily know what that recycling path is, but government and legislation has been brought into place to ensure that that is now happening. So it's ensuring there's a balance in the business and the environment. So you've got those business challenges, but also you want to bring that sustainability piece in. Looking at the individual, so that's kind of a broad brushstroke to the corporate sustainability piece. If we look at the individual businesses, then next slide, please, we can understand the impact of the individual firms. So how do you break that down in your operations, in your day-to-day operations? How do you evaluate and classify the consequences of your various operations? How do your economic agents, and that's really consumers, respond to the changing incentives that are available? The incentives being, if we're making this product greener, then how can I be totally sure that that product is green, hasn't got as many emissions that as another product has? Where do I get the information? We'll be seeing a lot of products saying sustainable, net zero. How do we challenge that, and how do we make sure that those claims are accurate? So how do we make sure that there's a reduction in the amount of greenwashing that goes on out there? So this is challenging. This is very challenging, and that's why we're spending quite a lot of time just talking about some of these business issues. There's obviously increased legislation coming in. There's a requirement for companies to go ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. So making sure that they're reporting against these three areas. What we're talking about today is a net zero approach. So we're talking about the environmental aspect of it, but we're making sure that can be met. And again, it's becoming more aware within the business community that you can drive and build your business through an ESG driven approach. And also the other aspect is very much thinking about what are your KPIs to ensure that you achieve what your goals are, what your business goals are, but also what your sustainability and net zero goals are. What are your timelines to do that? Which is important, but it can be very challenging. So if we then move on, so that's some of the issues there that very much companies are facing. If we move on to the next slide. So how do you approach your design now of your business, and how do you kind of incorporate some of those sustainability options? Next slide, please. So this is now thinking about, we've looked at the challenges, now we're looking at more, how do you actually build out those businesses? So within sustainable business, it's the relationship between your business and your society and the environment that it operates. Historically, a business has always been about delivering value for investors. The customers and the employees have been of a less significant aspect. It's always been about delivering value to a shareholder if it's listed, but it's making a profit. That's been the single goal of a lot of organizations over many decades, and indeed that has to change. So if you're an existing organization, an existing company, then it's difficult to make those changes where your primary purpose is to make profit for your shareholders. So this is the issue that they're facing. And also the relationship between your business and your society your employee and your wider society can have an impact there. So, if we're talking about the persona for Jackie, if she's looking at how can she ensure that her supply chain is ensuring that the environment is cared for, you've got your social context, the employees where those products were made have good welfare, good standards. How can you ensure that those aspects are maintained while also ensuring that the demands of the customer and the business that she's working in can also be met? So this is the challenge, right? So ideally, the company will be self-sufficient and do this for themselves, but government also have a large part to play through legislation and nudge policies to move the company towards taking the right steps and towards the right behaviour. So they do play a big role in nudging those companies in that direction. But if the nudging isn't approached, then legislation obviously comes in and takes more of an impactful step. Okay, so Supercharge your NetZero Goals tech first approach. Okay, so we're talking about the collection, analyze, and insight into your data and then taking action. So I'm now going to hand over to Bobby to just talk a little bit about some aspects of how you design your business for this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. Next slide, please. So how do you design for sustainability? Well, your standard sort of IT project delivery will often involve sort of strategic alignment, non-functional testing, design of operational sort of procedures, all that's much more than just your design, build and test. So it wouldn't be a stretch to add sort of sustainability tasks into an overall project delivery and sustainability requirements for that project. So what would the requirements look like? Well, the ability to kind of cost the project. So you've got a project which has got people, it's got applications, it's got equipment, it's got time, all of which can have an emission value associated with them. You could go to third parties who are providing products or suppliers or contractors or consultants for you, and you can get them to make a statement over their emissions as a company. That way, if you take a product, Jackie immediately is told the emissions associated with the stuff she's buying. Therefore, she's got that information today. You also build in the ability to measure emissions from those applications and systems. So the principle, it's quite common, a principle of all sort of systems and applications that you deploy has some sort of API or interface that you can pull data from, or it can provide you with that data. If you look at something like Amazon, they had that as a strategic goal, whereby every system had an API and an interface, which meant that when they introduced Electra as a services, it was already there, could easily communicate with the account functionality, so it's there. So you can imagine there in that situation means they've already got some sort of interface so they can pull that data and build out a real-time sort of emissions solution today. But just thinking about the IT project and project delivery, you need to also build in a kind of end-of-life disposal strategy. So by that, you're thinking about upgrades, regular upgrades, cycled upgrades, and then at the end of it, potential replacement and removal. So again, you've got it's giving you a kind of 360-degree view of the whole sort of projects and systems and things like that. But that's for designing for tomorrow. What do we do today? Next slide, please. So there's an existing estate and we need to do something now. So how do we attack that? So in simple, it's the three things that Richard mentioned before. It's your collection, your calculation, and your insights. So capture the information in your data, measure it, and analyze it to get an insight of how sort of emissions can be reduced. Most of your sort of enterprise applications these days do have some sort of API interface that you can pull data from or can't even provide it for you. But if that's not always possible or capable with some of the heritage applications that exist, there are always financial systems and financial records that can give you a starting point to make an assessment on your various emissions. You can go to your suppliers and you can ask them for sustainability scorecards so that they can give you so that they can give you their information and you can make a much more sort of better assessment on your indirect emissions as an organization. So all this, you can pull it all together and you can analyze it and you can view it, and that gives Jackie her 360-degree report that she was often wanting. And from that you can look at how you can reduce it, offset it, and even down to the asset level of emissions and sort of business areas, you can get an assessment on that. So next slide, please. What's the technical approach to supercharging net goals? Richard, do you want to give a kind of business viewpoint on to the solution first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Bobby. So what's the approach to this? How do you understand your data? So next slide, please. So here's a view of a organization, the applications listed on the left. These are the systems that you would access to get hold of the data that you need to calculate your emissions. Using a MuleSoft, you would use the MuleSoft collectors, open APIs to collect that data from these systems, and then you would work out your emissions and calculate your CO2. You can then also visualize that within your Tableau. Tableau being a data visualization tool that we also have access to and can work with you on. It can also feed into your ESG reporting. So if we're thinking about Jackie, then she could, as part of her process, look at collecting data using IoT devices. So those sensors that you can put onto production lines, collect that data. It might be energy use, it might be other data, and that could be transferred into your through MuleSoft into a Salesforce product, Salesforce NetZero Cloud, which is a product to work out help you with your NetZero goals. You can also use open APIs to then do those calculations, but there's a lot of different options there. We can work with existing companies to look at where they are with their data collection and make recommendations. We can also work with existing clients who maybe have some Salesforce or indeed MuleSoft set up, but we can advise on where you can then take the next step to progress your data collection or your decision making. So typically a lot of companies will start just collecting a one-time snapshot of the data, their net zero data, and then they'll start thinking about how can this be automated, how can we do this less on a yearly basis but more monthly. Anyway, so the data then gets put into Tableau, and that's where it gets really interesting, because you start to make options and decisions there about giving you where your emissions are coming from, and then you can actually make those decisions to reduce or offset. So this is a whole 360 view of you're accessing your data, reviewing it, making the decisions, and then making taking steps to reduce your emissions. So that's kind of from a high level view. It's a four-step approach, and we can tailor this to fit and work with most organisations. Back to you, Bobby.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks. Next slide, please. So this is showing a sort of arguably a standard sort of API-led 3-layer MuleSoft solution to integrating your various applications through to your sort of service endpoints. So in short, this is probably summarized into about 4 areas. So you've got, if you like, on the top bit, you've got the ability of applications, and so it's to be able to call through and pass the data and their measurements in real time. So as Richard said, it's things like IoT devices, or you could take the example of a supplier introducing a new product and then quickly passing that information into its customers so that they can get aware of they get awareness of the data, they can make an emissions decision now. There's often going to be a situation though whereby a number of sort of heritage applications whereby whilst you can build an API interface into them. It might involve cost, new modules, a certain amount of design and build for that application, and therefore it's often easier just to take a regular sort of scheduled update, pulling the data, and again putting it into your emissions repository. So that emissions repository then being the one source of truth for your emission data. Sometimes, again, you may even get in a situation where some applications, they can't go to that level of integration. So the reason that MuleSoft introduced their sort of RPA technology and solutions was this ability to read, so screen scrape data or read emails. So if you think of the utility bills, that more often than not are sent as a PDF to an email address, you've got your RPA functionality that can read that, go through the standard sort of layering exercise of an API of your solution, so it can do any processing associated with it. Again, it puts that information into your repository store. So after having pulled all the information you've got from various sort of areas, having placed it in an application for analytics, you then can do the fourth level to provide some sort of screens or notifications to users, whether it be customers or Jackie as a buyer. So going back to the scenario whereby a supplier introduces a new product, they send that data through to Jackie's organization. She can then go in by means of some sort of mobile application or PC to access that information and get the calculated data immediately. Next slide, please.
Bobby, before we move to the next slide, may I ask you a few questions, please?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so how frequent does the data change, and does it change automatically?
So this is a bit of your standard architectural get out, whereby the answer is it depends. So it really depends on your source applications, what functionality. So going back to, ideally, if you could send that supplier, the supplier sends your product information immediately, so their application's triggered, you could get that data real time, and then you know what you want and you can make actions and decisions straight away. If you're going to be pulling data with scheduled updates, working on a daily basis is probably enough to get that information, so you can look at yesterday's terms of what emissions occurred and things like that. But again, it depends on the organisation, the requirements they need, how quickly they need that information, how quickly they want that information, whether there's a regulatory sort of body saying that they need to be able to do that on a yearly, 3 monthly, monthly, you name it.
Okay, so it would be ideal if it would be on daily basis, but it depends on the organizations and regulatory requirements, right?
Exactly, yes.
Oh, okay, thanks. And how does it connect to the existing data sources? And can MuleSoft connect to other platforms as well?
Yeah, so arguably the strength of MuleSoft and its Anypoint platform is its an ability to connect to pretty much any application, if it's given the ability to access it. So there's hundreds of MuleSoft connectors to go into most of sort of your enterprise applications and other sort of connectivity. It's almost like it's bread and butter connections of being able to do HTTP RESTful connects to any sort of endpoint that facilitates that. You've got it can connect to anything. The challenge and the challenge and the difficulty is more from the concept of the application, the client's applications, whereby how secure it needs to be, there, how far it's deep under a data center, how much you're prepared to expose that data, and so on and so forth. Arguably, going back to the strength of it, we've got an analytics platform, because as Richard said, whilst there's various tools for doing it, an organization may have an existing solution, may have an existing partner who collects for whom they collect the data for, and therefore this is an opportunity to collect all the data and give it to them all with piecemeal and immediately.
Okay, so basically, MuleSoft can connect to any other data source, but as it has MuleSoft connectors built in case it's not already created, we can always customize them, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for explanation. Please move on with your slides.
Yeah, no worries. So whilst we've seen the MuleSoft sort of side of the solution, this is a screenshot from Tableau. Now, Tableau, the strength is giving you data, to helping you make data-driven decisions and getting you insights in the data. So as a sample, what this is showing is, say, a map, which is showing the locations associated with your business. So that could be offices, stores, suppliers, logistics operations where the products pass through. And you can, by the nature of Tableau, you can select one of these locations or a grouping of those locations if you want to, and it will give you the dig down and the details into the emissions associated with that. So you can look at a location and say, right, and understand what its potential footfall is, what its potential sort of electricity utility usage is, the travel emission costs associated with that location or individuals associated with that location, the great what sort of level of waste they're producing on a regular basis, and so on and so forth, really. And it just gives you that sort of insight. So going back to Jackie can then look at her suppliers and work out, where they are relative to the delivery for the rest of the country and organisation. Next page, please, or slide, please. Right, so benefits. So in summary, what are the benefits of this solution? Well, it certainly gives you a better understanding of what your emissions are, and for today. It gives you an efficient way of collecting the data, so you're not using a series of manual processes to be able to pull the data and to try and make a decision. It also gives you the capability of reporting on stuff. So if you think about the ESG reports and daily reports, potentially monthly reports, it gives that capability for the users to be able to use this, right? And at the end of the day, once you've got all this and you've done the report, you've got a benchmark. So with that benchmark, you can compare yourself on a yearly or a monthly basis as to how you're improving to reduce your emissions. You can compare it with your competitors, and then potentially you would have a competitive advantage over your competition and retail competition. To therefore, I've seen this happen in the kind of retail banking scenario, whereby when they did an efficient deep dive into their emissions, they found out they were the most sustainable bank in the UK. So just to kind of summarise the solution, what we've seen now in the last couple of slides, really, it's a Salesforce, MuleSoft, Tableau sort of solution, whereby we're collecting data efficiently and quickly in order to give the user a kind of insights into what their emissions are. So we're trying to move on from the current sort of process where we're often backward looking, taking a rear view approach to get data and taking 6 months to gather the data to tell you what your emissions were last year. So it's an efficient, it's real time, and you can get that information as fast as possible. Right, I'm going to hand over to Tom now. Who's going to
let me just jump in there. I think there's also a couple more points as well. I think we're seeing a requirement for the regulatory reporting, which I mentioned, for the data. So this monthly, yearly reporting on your net zero and emissions. So that's obviously coming through legislation from the EU and from the UK government. So we're seeing a requirement for that, but then also, which is kind of the more nuanced, interesting area, is what Jackie would want from her operational business, right? She wants that data to be able to then make those decisions. And does it bring additional benefits to not just understanding your CO2 emissions for your product, but also is there additional benefits around how you're running your business? If you're tracking your emissions through IoT devices, what additional opportunities are there for your business to take advantage of in those situations? So I think you're seeing a maturing of the business requirement and that reporting requirement kind of splitting into two distinct areas. So I jumped in there, Bobby. Back to you.
No worries. Thanks for adding that and everything. That's fine. That's good. As you say, it's important. The ESG reporting is going to become more and more and more critical, and things like that. Tom, path to net zero.
Yep. Next slide, please. So once you have conducted this analysis and gone through this approach, the obvious next step towards net zero is, what do I do about this? What do I do about these numbers? So next slide, please. You've got two main options, two main considerations. That's reduction strategies and offsetting. So reduction is the practice of reducing your carbon footprint by removing these costly actions and items from your business portfolio. Reduction is widely considered to be the best course of action, and every climate conscious company should have a reduction strategy in place. This can be achieved through the introduction of a scheme such as science-based target initiatives or something similar along those lines. The benefits around reduction are numerous, with the most obvious being the permanent reduction of your overhead carbon footprint. These strategies allow companies to align to goals set and reduce their impact on the planet. For example, investing in green energy sources is a fantastic way of reducing your Scope 1 emissions. Measurable progress can also be made, and that's something that is very important to ensure change. Whilst reduction is the best option, a reduction strategy like an SBTI or something else can take a lot of time to implement, and this opens opportunities for offsetting. So offsetting is the process of reducing the targeted carbon footprint by purchasing carbon credits. A single carbon credit is equivalent to a single ton of carbon equivalent. These carbon credits can come from a variety of sources, such as reforestation projects, biodiversity conservation, other projects and things along these lines. These industries are historically underfunded, especially here in the UK, and investment into carbon credits allows for that investment to flow into these industries and allows for change to be made on a larger scale. Next slide, please. So following on to that, we look at what's happening in the retail space. This ties in with Jackie's plan. So what does a company do to implement a path to net zero? It's all well and good look at having the numbers, but you need to improve those numbers. So you start with you develop a robust plan. So you use metrics already known within the retail industry. This can be how popular a product is, what the costs of a product are. And we build on this, and we can invest in products that are not only popular with consumers, but are also sustainably sourced. From Jackie's point of view, that could be looking at different suppliers. As a product buyer, she spends a lot of time looking at different suppliers. And instead of just choosing the cheapest option, she would choose an option that has a reduced carbon footprint as well as that. You then take the next step, which is investing into a scheme that aligns with the company's goals and values. So that's something like, as I mentioned before, an SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative scheme. And you work with people that are knowledgeable in the space. You don't have to do all this on your own. You can build a goal and a scheme up with people that are knowledgeable. You use this scheme to recognize some achievable goals. And these goals are the key to initiatives like this working. And the company that is involved being able to make a difference and reduce the carbon footprint that they see. Tracking the progress associated with these goals is obviously very important, and investing into these schemes allows for the goals to be tracked and seen in the public domain, which holds the company accountable and allows for everybody to understand what's happening. You then move forward to analysing the adoption of this plan. So you can use reporting metrics, that could be through Tableau, which will allow for adaptations and improvements to be made to the plan, and therefore it improves your path to net zero and could actually shorten the path to net zero. If you see you've made a massive step in a leap in one area, you could implement something in another area to help and build on that. So having a circular plan like this can really help align everyone within an organization, especially large organizations, and allow for changes to be made on that larger scale and at regular intervals, which is very important, improving the collaboration that is needed to make serious change. And serious change is, I think everybody that's here will agree, is what's needed. I'm going to hand back over to Richard now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Tom. So if we now think about just summing up, and if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. Now would be the time to do that. But in summary, so we need a shift, right? We need to rediscover the relationship between a business and sustainability. We've looked at the issues, which there are many, to achieve this. We've looked at the way businesses can be built with design in, but the issues around building that into existing operations is significant when there's always pressures to achieve profits from a business perspective. We've also looked at how can we then look at understanding the data to make those decisions, and that's essentially the nuts and bolts. That's how we can supercharge your net zero goals, right? So you're crafting those business practices with a green element. You're leveraging that data, that intelligence to make those informed decisions, and it's a catalyst for transforming through a technology first, a strategy, an approach to your net zero aspirations. Okay, and what we would use and suggest is the technologies that we've mentioned here, which is the MuleSoft, Salesforce, NetZero Cloud, and Tableau. These all together can work very well, but can also work independently to fit into your existing business ecosystem and whatever other applications you're using. So you have that option to pick different approaches, and definitely we're strong in all these areas. Okay, so I think that is everything from a summary perspective. It's back to you, Alexandra.
Thanks, Richard. So now it's time for questions.